king of rock himself, Elvis Sinosic. Welcome to MMA Live TV.
Good to be the king. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to chat about what I'm doing and what I've been up to and where I've come from.
Nice one, mate. I can see you're at the gym. Tell us a bit. How has COVID impacted the business and where are you guys at currently now?
My gym is King's Academy of Martial Arts. We teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, MMA, kids classes. We have hot yoga. I'm very big on both training and recovery. We also have a sauna, ice bath, hyperbaric oxygen chamber, hot yoga sessions, and a strength and conditioning room. So I try and have all aspects of training covered. Same as all the gyms. We had to shut down for just under 3 months, so it was a difficult time. Obviously, our income stream pretty much disappeared. We did have some members supporting, which we really appreciated, just enough to keep some income coming in to kind of pay the bills. The government did come on board, but obviously we had to wait a while before that actually came into effect, but we've got the government assistance happening. We've managed to stay open. We've just recently reopened. Obviously, we've reopened with the social distancing requirements. We've got only a couple more days until July 1st when the full contact comes back into play. So I know we're looking forward to it. I know all the students are looking forward to it. It has been a difficult time, and from my perspective, a little bit disappointing with how the government have kind of treated this.
Yep. What have you been disappointed in specifically?
Well, so I'm kind of very anal when I do stuff. I can get quite obsessive. I mean, if you check out my academy, as I said, I pretty much have everything here relations to martial arts. And when I get into something, I kind of take a deep dive. So when we went into lockdown, I didn't have a lot of, I had a lot of spare time. So I actually got quite intrigued by the COVID situation. It's very closely related to health and nutrition, which again is something I'm very much keen on, and I take a deep dive and I'm constantly learning about. So I started reading up and watching podcasts, looking at the statistics and trying to understand what was going on.
Yep.
And initially, like everyone else, I was concerned because it was an unknown element. But as the situation has evolved, we've kind of started to see that the numbers are very specific to who they're affecting. So a lot of elderly people, people with immune dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction, so things like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obesity, and specifically vitamin D deficiency. So the general healthy mid-age to younger generation aren't really greatly affected by this. A lot of them have what's called asymptomatic infection, which means they get it. They don't really show any signs, but of course they can spread it, but asymptomatic spread is much lower than symptomatic spread.
Yep.
So once I started realizing the people that have been mostly affected by it are those, as I mentioned, with metabolic dysfunction. What can help metabolic dysfunction? Exercise. So closing gyms just seems counterintuitive, because even though they say, oh, you can train at home, if everyone could train at home and would train at home, they'd have been doing it, and gyms would have gone out of business a long time ago. So martial arts schools, gyms, all these places should have been open because people need to stay fit and healthy. They were telling us to stay home, stay indoors, and a big part of it is vitamin D deficiency is also very high on those with high mortality rates. So we want to be outside. We want to be in the sun. So shutting down beaches, telling people not to go out, very poor advice. Part of the problem of getting stuck at home is you get stuck in front of the TV. What do you do when you're watching TV? You go out, you get junk food. What does junk food do? It elevates your glucose in your system. It raises your insulin, which again leads to pre-diabetes, diabetes. It leads to obesity because you're sitting on the couch, you're not moving around, so you're going to be putting on weight. You're not training like you used to.
Yep.
So all these things, which should be done to help us improve our health, which would help fight COVID,
Yeah.
are kind of been shut away. We've kind of been put into a situation where now we're actually making our um, chance of infection and chance of bad results increase because we're in lockdown. We would have been much better off sticking to a more social distancing type situation where we can um, use the social distancing, wear masks, more your general hygiene. If anything, showed that Taiwan was probably one of the first countries to respond to it.
Yeah.
And they did basically smart social distancing, masks, hygiene, and self-isolation when the situation came up. And they have some of the lowest rates of infection. So it just shows that lockdown wasn't necessary to mitigate the results of this virus. So that's kind of why I'm a bit disappointed. And once the statistics came out, I can understand the initial reaction being, look, you know what, this is what we need to do. Fair enough. You've got to kind of take extreme measures sometimes. But once the data starts coming in, once you start understanding it, you need to make adjustments. Even now, I'm seeing a lot of scaremongering in the media. They're saying, oh, infections are going up because of this and that. Of course, infections are going up. The main thing is deaths going up. If deaths are not skyrocketing, infections is irrelevant. We
Yeah.
actually want to spread infection because that's how we develop immunity.
Yeah.
And the goal is long-term herd immunity. So we shouldn't fear infection. And as long as our medical system isn't overwhelmed, we should be able to handle all the extreme cases. Are people going to die? Yes, they're going to die. People die each year from the flu. People die each year from numerous respiratory diseases, from obesity, from diabetes, from car accidents, from tripping down the stairs. People are going to die. Do I want them to die? No. But we have to accept that it is going to happen as long as we've done everything we can to mitigate the situation. And what we want to do is have our hospital systems able to handle it. Then we've done enough. So I guess that's why I'm a little bit disappointed. I was kind of hoping the Australian government would kind of adjust a little bit more, start looking at the data a little bit deeper. If you have a look at the actual statistics for COVID, we're currently about 480,000 deaths worldwide. And the flu season is pretty much over. Obviously, our flu season is just starting, but when you look at the world numbers with Europe and America and Asia and all that, their flu season is ended. And if you go back to 2017, 2018, their flu season ended about this same time. So we had about 480,000 deaths from COVID. We had 650,000 deaths from the flu. It was an extreme flu. It was very severe, but almost 50% more deaths from the flu, yet there was no lockdown, no social distancing, no change in anything. What you also have to remember is with COVID, we have no treatments, we have no vaccine. With the flu, we have treatments, we have vaccines, yet even with the treatments and vaccines, it's still a 50% higher death rate than what COVID is. So obviously, in 2018, we were in a much worse situation than we are, yet no one did anything about it. The problem with COVID is fear of the unknown. So because it was something new, everyone kind of freaked out. They reacted in a very fearful way. But once they started understanding it, they should have kind of pulled back. It's not the first coronavirus that has come out. There are 7 other coronaviruses out there. 4 of them are responsible for the common cold. The other 2 are SARS and MERS, which are a little bit more extreme. But once again, once we got those under control, things return to normal. And it should really be the same here for COVID. So, I mean, that's why I'm a little bit disappointed. As I said, I still follow the government's recommendations and I follow the rules. But that doesn't mean I have to be happy about doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It does sound like when you go into something, you really go deep, mate. The quoting of the statistics and all that, I can definitely see that.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, as I said, when I enjoy something, if you were to see my photography room, I have camera equipment everywhere.
Yeah.
Obviously, the gym here, and my nutrition and COVID stuff. I've gone pretty deep. And look, I'm still kind of looking deeper because obviously it's still an evolving situation.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that's come out of it recently is that vitamin D deficiency. If you are deficient in vitamin D, your outcomes are worse. Now, that doesn't mean go out and start taking vitamin D tablets, because they don't seem to, if you look at a lot of the research when you go into nutrition, vitamin D supplementation via pills doesn't provide the same benefits as vitamin D when you go out into the sun or
Of
get it
course.
from your
Yeah.
food. It
Yeah.
does assist a little bit, but you should be predominantly going outside. I think what it has a lot more to do with it is what we do that gets us the vitamin D. And that means going outdoors, being in nature. And that's where you build your immunity. You're in the dirt, you're in nature, you're playing with animals, you're outside, you're getting sun. So sun raises your vitamin D level, but it's the activities that you do out there that I believe are just as beneficial, and not just the vitamin D level itself. But that is a good indicator that if your vitamin D levels are low, you're not doing these things and you're going to be at higher risk for COVID.
Of course, of course. Look, let's talk to the unknown. So you're known as a pioneer of MMA in Australia. I'm really interested to get your feel of, Cage Combat One, right? That was the first
Yes,
MMA event in Australia. What was that
1997.
night? How did that all come about? And what was the feeling in that room for those people that for the first time in Australia saw something like this live? Like, can you recount
So,
that night?
oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to take a couple of steps back. So I got into martial arts through Bruce Lee. So if you go back to my era, and again, that's giving away my age a little bit.
Yeah.
In the 70s, Bruce Lee was very popular. I had all his VHS tapes, so not on Blu-ray or not on USB sticks. So, it was the old VHS versus beta era. I used to watch all these movies. I really want to be a martial artist. I started with judo as a little kid, but I really want to do punching and kicking. And then I moved into taekwondo, and so I was doing martial arts. And then I got to university, and I stopped. So while I was at university, I started doing other sports at the uni. So me and my friends each month would pick a new sport and we'd play it for a month. And we'd go to another sport, play it for a month. One of the sports we picked up was volleyball, which led to beach volleyball, which I started traveling up to Sydney with. While I was in Sydney, while I was still in Canberra, John Will, who you're probably familiar with, who is the head of Machado Australia, brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Australia. Um, he started traveling overseas for his Blitz magazine, which he'd started, and he was going to Indonesia to train and compete in Salat, went to India to the wrestling pits, and ended up in Brazil and discovered this little known martial art called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Started training, I believe, with some of the Gracies, but ended up meeting the Machado brothers, Hegan and all that. And I'm reading about this, and I was really intrigued by this sport. And so I wanted to do some jiu-jitsu, but in Canberra there was nothing. But I found a Jun Fan school, which is Bruce Lee style. So Bruce Lee developed Jeet Kune Do, but before it became Jeet Kune Do, it was known as Jun Fan. And it had elements of Salat and the defense, some of the striking from Muay Thai, and a little bit of grappling from Jiu-Jitsu. And I kind of, wow, this is pretty cool. I'm getting to do all these bits and pieces. So I started getting into it, and I was like, "Wow, this is cool." And then I was also playing beach volleyball, so this is where it kind of all comes in together.
Yep.
And I decided I wanted to move to Sydney, because up in Sydney there was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school. Anthony Lange was teaching. He was one of John Will's students. He had a school up there. He was in Manly. Manly was where the beach volleyball was being played. So it just seemed smart for me to move up to Sydney and up to that area. So I moved up there, started training with Anthony Lange, was playing pro beach volleyball. And then while I'm up there, again, Blitz magazine comes out, and this event called Australasian UFC, send your nominations in. I'm like, oh, this is absolutely fantastic. I'd already heard about it. One of my friends at my old job in Canberra had given me the UFC 2 tape where I'd seen Hoist Gracie choke out all these monsters. And that's kind of part of what have inspired me, along with John Will's magazine, to kind of get into jiu-jitsu. So I saw the opportunity, and I'm like, you know what? This sounds great. I want to jump in there. I want to test myself. Now, it was only ever supposed to be one fight. I was only ever supposed to go in there. As a kid, I was picked on a little bit. I was bullied. And that's part of the reason I also got into the martial arts, looked up to Bruce Lee because he was a small guy beating up big guys. And I wanted to be able to protect myself.
Yep.
But I'd never really gotten into any major confrontations. Obviously, a couple of scuffles at school and stuff like that. And then here I had this opportunity to kind of jump into a cage fight event. Now, it was called Australasian UFC when they were advertising it, but obviously after legal action from the UFC, it got renamed to Cage Combat 1.
Gotcha.
So I sent my application in. I wanted to go in there. I wanted to test my personal courage and fortitude. You know, what would happen if I was in a self-defense situation, where someone wants to hurt me? Would I just fall over and cry like a little girl, or would I have the courage to actually stand up and fight? So that was part of, I wanted to see how I would react to it. And the second part was, well, how do my skills actually translate? Does my striking, does my grappling, does it actually work? So it was kind of a twofold experiment. And so, just give me a second.
Oh, good.
So I just had someone else calling there.
No worries.
It was a twofold experiment just to kind of see how I reacted, which comes up to the next part where you were talking about. Now, it was the first ever event in Australia. It was very new. When it first was announced, it was like people like, oh my God, this is, human cockfighting, and, it's fighting to the death. Oh my God, it's going to be too brutal. And as the event got closer, the CSA started trying to shut it down because they didn't understand it. They didn't want this event to go ahead. Yep. And they had all jurisdiction over any boxing, kickboxing, or wrestling. So they were trying to shut it down. So the promoter came to us and said, look, if you train in wrestling, you can't say it. You've got to say judo or grappling or something like that. If you do kickboxing, you have to call it karate. Okay. If you do boxing, you have to call it some sort of martial art, because we're making it a martial art versus martial art event. Sure. So that's kind of how they kind of managed it to get it again, to get it to happen. Now, I wasn't accepted because the promoter said, look, you're not a name. You don't have enough experience. You're pretty much a nobody, but, we'll keep you on hold if anything happens. So I basically called him every single day in the lead up to the event. And about 10 days before, some of the fighters who'd already not kind of nominated to compete, I think they started cross-training, and they went to some of the other gyms that actually had a little bit of mixed martial arts going on. Yep. Larry Papadopoulos was doing Shudo and Pancras, and Chris Hazeman was up in Queensland with rings, and which was kind of an MMA pro wrestling type promotion. And they started realizing that maybe they weren't ready to jump into a cage and do this sort of fighting. So yep. I couldn't tell you who the names were, but I know quite a few of the names just pulled out at the last second. And then one of the days I've called up, going, hey, Randy, how are you going? Any spots? He goes, you wouldn't believe it, but we've got a spot. Are you happy to jump in? I'm like, I'm ready to go now. Put me in. So I got put in to the show. And then, again, it was an amazing experience. When I walked out into that arena, like it actually had 5,000 people. It was in Darling Harbour. Yeah. It was crazy. Like the people there didn't know what to expect. They were super excited. I think one of the earlier events had already happened. One of the earlier matches, I think I was the second or third match. So they'd already gotten a feel of what was going on, and they loved it. They were excited. The crowd was going off. It was absolutely pumped. I'm even getting the goosebumps, remembering it. And so this environment, I'm walking out, and it's absolutely electric, and I'm looking left, I'm looking right, and I'm just seeing all these people and hearing these noise. And I walk into the cage, and my opponent is already over there. So I walk across, and I'm looking across at him. I'm looking around, and then the gate closes, and I still remember it, and it's just this clang that just rings in my mind. As soon as that gate shut and the clang, everything just went. And the only thing I could see, the only thing I could hear was my opponent and the referee. The whole world just disappeared for that moment. The referee goes start. The fight happened. It was, quite a quick fight. It went, I think, for about a minute, minute and a half or something like that. And then suddenly it's over, and then everything just goes, and the crowd starts screaming and chanting my name and Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. And I'm just like, whoa, this feeling is a rush. And what was supposed to be a one-off fight turned into an MMA career.
You've fought in a couple of different promotions, right? UFC, K1, Pancrase, Cage Rage. Of these organizations and experiences, like what really sticks out to you when you think of your totality of your career?
I've fought pretty much all over the world, all the different organizations. Look, they all have their pluses, their minuses. I mean, when it came down to it, it's like the biggest event I'd ever fought in front of was the K1 GP in 2000, where I faced Frank Shamrock. It was something like almost 80,000 people in the Tokyo Dome, which was just insane. It's just hard to comprehend. But the most atmosphere I've ever felt in an event was a UFC event. The UFC events just go absolutely crazy. The atmosphere in there is through the roof. The fans are loud, they're vibrant, they're excited. Whereas the Japanese fans tend to be a little bit more reserved. They seem to be a little bit more educated. They get excited with a lot of the grappling exchanges and things like that, where obviously the UFC fans tend to prefer the striking exchanges and the big knockouts and things like that. Everyone was always very professional. All the organizations that I've ever fought at have always treated me well. I don't have any complaints in that regard. Obviously, the UFC, I spent my most time at, and they've always really looked after me. I never had any issues. Obviously, I'd like to be around today with the sort of money that they're making, and they're making bank, and they're still not happy with the amount of money that they're making, because obviously they're not making as much as other professional sports. So, it is a difficult situation. But then when you go back to when I was fighting, and it was pretty much just for pocket change, where the fighters back in the day were doing it because they loved combat sports, because they were fighters at heart and they wanted to challenge themselves. They weren't doing it to get rich or to become famous. It was more about that personal journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the UFC. Tell me, how do you go from beating Jeff Horn to fighting for the title in Tito? Normally there's a progression there, but how did that play itself out?
Look, so I had a kind of difficult situation. I was in Australia, and I was one of the first internationals, to kind of come over there with the UFC. I fought on the first ever Zuffa show. Sure. So I'm going to, again, jump back a little bit. So I'm back. I'm from around the days before the internet wasn't really what it is today. It was fairly new. There were no YouTubes. There was no Facebook. There was no social media. The only way we kind of contacted was via email. There were message boards, things like that, where we could share information, but it was quite limited. And one of the communication methods we had was what was called a mailing list. So everyone would join this mailing list, and then you would email to the server, and then it would go out to everyone, and then you'd reply to whichever email you wanted to. And obviously, because I was in a different country and I was using my work email, I couldn't have emails coming in and out. So I went on to what was called the digest version. So at the end of each night, all the emails would be sent in a single notepad document. Then I would kind of go through and I would reply to the particular people that I wanted to respond to in it. And you kind of got chatting. Now, on that mailing list were two guys. One was the promoter for an event called UCC, Universal Combat Challenge. Later on became known as TKO, which is where GSP came from.
Yep.
And another person was this little known guy called Joe Silva, who was assistant to John Peretti.
Yep.
So I'd already hit up the UFC about coming over and fighting, and I'd spoken to John Peretti, and then he kind of got back to me and went, look, financially, it's just not worth us flying you out and paying you to fight. And I'm like, I'll fight for free if I have to. I just want to come out and fight. And
Yep.
it just wasn't. It was quite exorbitant. The fees, the costs for flights from Australia back then, and
Sure.
myself, a corner and accommodation, and then flying me back. And so, and this was the SEG days. And so Peretti went, no, it's not going to happen. I went, okay, fair enough. As I said, I met the two other guys. And now what happened was I contacted UCC and they said, look, and I'm like, look, I want to fight light heavyweight. And they're like, oh, look, we've got too many light heavyweights. But we need some heavyweights. Would you be willing to fight at heavyweight? And I'm like, yeah, look, I'll do anything. I don't care. When I fought in Australia, I fought for the heavyweight belt when I really wasn't a heavyweight. I won the heavyweight belts, I think roughly at the same weight as I would have been when I was fighting light heavyweight.
Okay.
And that's without cutting or anything like that. So I wasn't supposed to fight on their first event. I was supposed to go into their second event. So their first event, they had a heavyweight title fight. And then the second event, they had a 4-man tournament with 4 heavyweights. And the winner of that tournament was going to challenge against whoever won the title in their first event.
Yep.
Then about a week before the event was supposed to go on, one of the main events had a car accident. So they were, I can't remember the name, but they were a French fighter, so in Paris, had a car accident, broke 3 vertebrae, and they were fused in his neck. So he had to obviously pull out of the show, and he actually surprisingly still flew there to support the show, which
Yeah, right.
kind of impressive. And anyway, so they called me and they've gone, look, we need someone to fight Chemo for the heavyweight belt. Are you up for it? I'm like, throw me in, send me the flights. Me and my corner will come up and we'll do that. And so I got booked in for the flights, and then while we're flying over, all this commotion started happening where suddenly Chemo was supposed to turn up. He didn't turn up. He's not replying to any of the calls from the promoters. And then on the day, I think on the day I arrived, but before I actually get there, so I'm still in the air, a post goes up on AD Combat. So adcombat.com was the news source back in the day. That's where everyone got their MMA and no-gi information. They were kind of linked back to the first ever ADCC in 1998, which, by the way, I did compete in as well.
Yep.
On AD Combat, there was a photo of Chemo holding up a hand. He had his fingers in a splint. He was holding up an X-ray, apparently broke his finger. Okay. And the promoters are going, well, why didn't he tell us? He didn't contact us, didn't say anything. This post just turned up on AD Combat. So they contacted and said, look, even if you can't fight, jump on, we'll rebook your flight, come up, you can apologize to the fans and you can challenge for the belt on the next show. And he's like, oh, okay. And they booked the flights and he never actually ended up jumping on the flight. And again, I don't know why or what happened, whether there were other issues, but he never turned up. So I land in Montreal, because that's where the event was happening. And there was no main event. They didn't have anyone to fight. So they've gone, would you fight Jeremy Horn? I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. He's close to my weight. I'm happy to do that.
Yep.
They contacted Jeremy, and I'd already fought Frank Shamrock earlier. So I'd fought Frank Shamrock in K1, went to a 5-round decision. I lost the decision to Frank. It was an MMA match on a K1 show. So it was one of the first MMA thing. I think there was only one before, which may have been Chemo and someone. But anyway, so he decided not to take the match. And so they said, look, we've got a couple of other opponent options for you. Would you fight Tom Erickson? I said, you know what? I would fight Tom Erickson. I was lined up to fight him in Australia 2 years earlier. But then the promotion fell through. It was meant to be the Cage Combat 2 was supposed to come up. I was supposed to fight Tom Erickson in the super fight. And I said, look, I'm happy to fight him, but to fight someone that side, he was 300 pounds. I'm like, I can't do it on a week's notice. Look, I need to train specifically for him. I need to do some strength and conditioning. I can't come in unprepared. Yep. They said, well, what about Dan Severn? And I'm like, he's 280 pounds. There's not much different between him. Okay, I said, look, if it makes it easier, put those two in for the title fight. Throw me on an undercard, main bout or whatever. I'm happy to fight whoever. But, you know, these guys are just too big. And they're like, okay, just give us a while. They went back and they went, oh, we've got Dave Beneteau. And I went, well, isn't he was like 260, 270 in the UFC, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Because he fought in the UFC also earlier. And they went, no, we spoke to him. And he's only about 230 pounds. And I'm like, oh, 230? Oh, that's not too bad. I was about 200. I told them I was about 210. So, which is about, I was about 90 kilos. So he was saying he was about, I think about 110 or 115. And I'm like, you know, 20 kilo disadvantage, I can live with that. It's not 30 or 40 kilos.
Yeah.
It's a lot, but I'm happy to kind of go for it. And so I accepted the fight. I ended up getting matched with Beneteau. And I weighed myself beforehand. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm really light. I'm like under 210. I told them I'm 210. So what I did is I went to the gym that was there, and I got ankle weights and wrapped them around my ankles, put them underneath my tracksuit. I got a couple of small hand weights, put them in my pockets.
Yeah.
And I went in and I didn't take my tracksuit. I can't remember if I may have taken my top off, but I've kept my tracksuit on because I had all these weights underneath. And I weighed in at something like 211 or something like that. And I'm like,
yeah, right.
But I was probably like just over 200 pounds. So I would have been just around 90 kilos, and I weighed in at that 95 kilo mark with the ankle weights and the weights in my pocket. And then Dave Beneteau comes on, and I'm expecting him to be about 230. He jumps on the scales, and again, he's wearing tracksuits and t-shirts, and it goes 265 pounds. And I'm like, what? Like, it's the heavyweight limit. And I went to the promoters and I said, you told me he was 230. And they go, oh, he told us he was about 240, 245. And I'm like, so you still lied to me. I go, I probably would have taken it if you told me 240.
Yeah.
And because he underestimated his weight, they underestimated his weight to me. So what I was expecting to be about a 20 or you know, at max a 20 kilo weight difference ended up being 65 pounds, which was, you know, 30 kilos or something, 30 plus kilos difference. And I'm like, oh, it is what it is. And I actually feel I won that. I should have the UCC first ever heavyweight title. That should be around my waist. Because during the match, I ended up going the distance and I lost the decision. Yep. But during the match, because he was a wrestler, I knew he was a wrestler, like I struck with him. He didn't land anything with me. I was landing some good shots. I was landing some really hard low kicks. So I'd really been working on my low kicks. It's something I'd used a lot in my fight against Frank Shamrock. And I really wanted to kind of use them because I knew it was important to slow down the shot of the wrestler. So I was chopping and chopping his legs over and over. So he'd take me down, he'd stick his head in my chest and then just kind of try and punch. He was just pretty much grinding me. He wasn't really, because at the start of the match when he took me down, he tried to posture up and punch, and I almost armbar triangled him, and he got out just because he was so big.
Yep.
And so after that, he was very conservative. And actually at the end of the first round, I actually took him down with the single leg. But the buzzer went before I was actually able to do any damage or anything. And then halfway through the second round, there were two 10-minute rounds as well. So they were kind of more the pride style rounds. Halfway through the round, I was kicking his leg and he shoots in for a takedown. And I've pulled guard because I wasn't trying to sprawl. I'm like, there's no point sprawling. I'm not going to stop a takedown on a guy who's 65 pounds heavier than me. My strategy was to pull guard, attack from guard, be offensive from there. If he stalled, get stood up, which was what had happened pretty much all the first round. This halfway through the second round, he shot, and I scooted back, foot in the hip. I'd come underneath, pulled up his arm, and I had a cutting arm bar. So I had his arm extended, head extended, wrist on my shoulder, arms locked in around his elbow. and he's pushed off to try and drive forward to escape the armbar, and his knee's dislocated. And he's gone, stop, 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 stop. So I've stopped. I'm holding the cutting armbar. I'm not cranking it because but I'm not letting go because I'm holding it until the ref says stop.
Of course.
And the ref goes, stop, stop, stop. So I release the submission. I'm like, yeah, I've won. And my coach goes, look, sit down. Don't waste your energy. I'm like, I've won. He stopped. He's given up during the match. And my coach has gone, sit down, relax, wait till we get the official decision. I'm like, oh, okay. I can't see why they would restart the match.
Yep.
So they've called the doctor in, and what had happened when he was pushing forward to try and defend the cutting armbar, his knee had dislocated. Now, that was obviously a result of the continuous leg kicks I'd been doing during the match. So the doctor, put it back into place, and they said, look, it's fine. It was only a minor dislocation. I don't even know if it was the kneecap or the knee or what. And then the referee's gone to him. He goes, do you want more time to rest? And Beneto's gone, yeah, I want more time. He goes, if you rest more, I'm going to call the match. If you can go now, we'll restart it. And I'm like, you can't restart it. He's given up.
Of course, yeah.
And so they ended up restarting the match, and he ended up taking me down, sticking his head in my chest for the rest of the match, and ended up going to a judge's decision. And because he was the hometown, he was a Canadian, they couldn't give him the win after everything that had happened, so it ended up being a draw. So I kind of missed out on that belt, whereas I really feel, I probably should have got the decision because I did all the damage during the fight. He did zero damage to me. The fight was stopped during it, so I think I should have got a submission victory. And I think because of that, the footage was never actually ever released. So it just kind of disappeared from there. So that kind of got me started in the fighting. And then I had the fight with Frank Shamrock, went 5 rounds. And then the opportunity came up to get into the UFC. So what happened was Jeremy Horn was meant to fight Cafe Dante. Now, Cafe Dante was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, very famous in Brazil.
Yep.
And obviously everyone knew who Jeremy was. He'd already choked out Chuck Liddell in one of his earlier fights with an arm triangle from underneath. He'd fought Minotauro and Anderson Silva overseas in some of the Asian events.
Yep.
So he was challenging for the #1 contender to face Tito. So about 10 days before the event, Cafe Dante pulls out because he's got a massive hole in his leg from a staph infection. The UFC have tried to find a replacement fighter. Nobody wants to fight Jeremy because he'd only just lost the match to Frank Shamrock, he'd been dominating.
Yep.
And Frank Shamrock, was 5 times defending champion, was considered the greatest UFC fighter at the time. He was the first real MMA fighter to cross-train with wrestling, grappling, and striking. And Jeremy had taken it to him until he got caught in that knee bar. And so no one to take the fight. And because I'd met Joe Silva on this mailing list, and now we're going back to the start of the story, the mailing list, I was chatting to Joe Silva. Now, SEG sold to Zuffa. When Zuffa purchased the UFC, they didn't bring John Peretti on board. As Joe Silva had been working with Peretti, they gave him the matchmaker role. So I already knew Joe through the mailing list. He couldn't find anyone else to fight. He knew that I'd already fought Frank and went the distance. So there was history between me and Jeremy indirectly through Frank. So we had a connection.
Yeah, gotcha.
Jeremy lost to Frank. I went the decision. Now, if he could beat me, I was the guy that Frank couldn't beat. It would kind of redeem him and give him that shot at the belt.
Yep.
So now he was the matchmaker. He contacted me and goes, do you want to fight in the UFC? And I'm like, shit, yeah, this is what I've been waiting for years,
Yep.
And so I got the opportunity. They flew me out there. Now, this leads to another interesting story. Now, same as I said earlier, the internet wasn't the same. So you weren't getting a lot of news. There weren't a lot of news sites. There wasn't a lot of forums or things. What was very popular was this newspaper magazine called Full Contact Fighter. So it was a print copy.
Yep.
So this would go out, and eventually Full Contact Fighter actually became a website and all that sort of stuff, and it was one of the original MMA websites, but it was a paper. And what would happen is every time there was a UFC, we'd get it about a month after it would happen.
Yep.
So we would always get it late. So we'd kind of look at it in retrospect. And in it, they'd always have predictions. So they would get famous coaches and fighters to predict the main event and co-main event. Now, when I went to fight Jeremy, it was the first time I ever got a copy of Full Contact Fighter before the
On
event.
time.
It was before the event that I was in.
Yeah, yeah.
So they had predictions for, obviously, the main event, which was Tito and Evan Tanner. And it was split about 50-50. Half the people thought Tito would win. Half the fighters and coaches thought Evan would win. With mine, it was the polar opposite. It was 100%. Every single coach and fighter said Jeremy Horn would win in under 3 minutes by submission.
Yeah.
So my goal, once I read that, kind of lit a fire under my ass, was to win by submission in under 3 minutes.
Yep.
I ended up getting a triangle armbar in 2 minutes and 59 seconds. So I did
There
cut
we
it close.
go. Yeah.
And then and that's where, my run in the UFC started. Now, that's also where my call sign came. While I'm sitting here waiting for my hand to be raised by the referee, I'm just so excited. I'm in the UFC, first time ever. I've won my match.
Yep.
I'm pumped. And just down here at my feet, there's this cameraman pointing up at me.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here, and I just look down at the lens, and I've just gone, done the old kiss the finger and finger point.
Yep.
And the UFC ended up loving it, ended up going on the end of their video montage for some of their events coming up. They did a video game, which I was a character on, and I was at the end of the montage. So the montage finishes with me doing the finger point. So that's kind of where the King finger point comes from.
Yep.
But anyway, so I ended up winning that event. After the event, me and my coach watched Tito just demolish Evan Tanner. And we've sat down and gone, look, Tito's an absolute beast. We really need to get quite a few fights under our belt. So we made an agreement that we would work on my career. We would get some fights, work up to a title fight, that we wouldn't rush into it.
Yep.
About a month later, I'm at home about 4 o'clock in the morning, get the phone call, very similar to the first phone call I got from Joe Silva when I got the UFC call. And he's like, hey, Elvis, no one wants to fight Tito. We can't find a contender because after he demolished Evan, nobody wants to step up. Do you want to fight him? You beat the number one contender. We're going to give you the shot. I just went, yeah, I'll take it. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I've kind of woken up and gone, fuck, I think I'm fighting for the heavyweight. But I had a dream that I'm fighting for the heavyweight title, light heavyweight title. Sorry, back then it was called the middleweight title. And I think for my event, it became the light heavyweight title. I'm roughly around that time. Anyway, so I've gone in to work and I've jumped on the email, and as per our phone call last night from Joe Silva, I'm like, oh, holy shit, it wasn't a dream. I am fighting for the UFC light heavyweight belt. So I've called my coach. I said, you know how we had that discussion about taking it easy and not rushing the career? I said, yeah, we've thrown that out the window. We're fighting Tito. He goes, well, if we're doing it, what the hell, let's get ourselves ready. And that's kind of how it kind of really skyrocketed quite early. And I've gone from being an unknown to a contender to fighting for the belt in a really short window of time.
Wow. Like, what a lot of stories to kind of get there. It's almost like a movie.
Yeah, well, I told you the biggest problem is shutting me up, not getting the information.
That's exactly it. Mate, looking back in your fight career, do you have any regrets? Like, if you could recount that, would you do anything differently?
Look, there's always things I would do differently, because experience shows you what would have been better. Would I have preferred to have been a little bit more conservative with the approach to my career, taking better fights so I could have a longer career in the sport? Yeah, of course, I would have loved to have done that, you know. But I don't regret anything. Would I have done things differently if I get a second chance? Absolutely. Do I regret it? No. It was the same when I went to fight in UFC 110. in 2010 here in Australia. I was supposed to fight Chris Hazeman. It was meant to be a big grudge match, rematch in the UFC. And during the training camp, I blew my shoulder, and the UFC tried to said, look, do you really want to pull out? And they sent me to doctors. I got injections, laser and guided injections. I had all these scans. They sent me to specialists, and
Yep.
they've all said the same thing. There's nothing we can do. You're going to need surgery.
Yep.
I could have fought with it. I could have still used my arm. But what concerned me was on my last sparring session, is my arm gave out on me. So it actually literally stopped working during the sparring, like the last 15 seconds of the sparring. And in the back of my head is I probably could have fought, and if I'd won early, it would have been fantastic. But if the match had gone longer,
Yep.
I don't know if my arm would have held up. So sometimes I kind of go, should I really have taken the fight? I mean, it was this historic event, the first time in Australia. I'm the Australian UFC and MMA pioneer. I really wanted to be in that event and pioneering and pushing forward. And, I did the right thing, I think, for my health. And I think a little bit of me was doing it for my record, because I knew it was a much bigger risk. There was more chance of me losing with the injury than if I had not been injured.
Yep.
If it hadn't given out, even with, because it had been injured, it got injured during the training camp, but I'd been able to work around it. Like, it was in throbbing pain for weeks, but I still was able to use it. It was just that last session where it literally stopped working that kind of freaked me out. And I sometimes wonder, should I have done it?
Yep.
Do I regret pulling out? No. But I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd actually just gone in there and did it and just gone, what the hell, and thrown it all to the wind.
Yeah, of course, of course. Uh, let's talk about Kings and the gym. As
Yes.
as a coach, what has been the biggest evolution and progression in martial arts that you've seen from your time to what you see now, like the kids coming in?
Well, obviously the kids are a lot more aware the parents are a lot more aware of what we're offering. They're now actually looking for jiu-jitsu and MMA and that sort of stuff. So that's why we have, for our kids program, we have a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, a Muay Thai, and wrestling program. So we don't do MMA for kids because we think it's more important to work the individual skills in each area
Yep.
rather than try and put it together. I think once the skills are in place, it's easier for kids. With adults, it's a little bit different. Adults are a little bit more aware of what's going on. So you can afford to train the individual skills and start putting them together a little earlier.
Yep.
Obviously, the sport has evolved more. It's continued to become more strategic. So, using the cage to get up, using the cage to stop people getting up, the interplay between jiu-jitsu and wrestling, the interplay between wrestling and striking, the interplay between striking and grappling has really evolved a lot. Obviously, from a mixed martial arts perspective, we still retain the individual styles. We think it's important. We still hold on to a lot of the traditions of bowing in, showing respect, building discipline for our kids and our members here.
Yep.
Also, I think something for me that really has evolved, which I wasn't aware of, which I'm trying to impart to my members, is recovery is just as important as training. So
Of course.
everyone wants to train. No one wants to really do recovery. So that's why here at Kings, we have the sauna, which is probably one of the most popular after training activities. We have an ice bath just out here. I have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber upstairs. We also have a complementary red light unit, which is red and near infrared light. And then on top of that, we have the hot yoga classes as well. And it's all designed to complement everything we do here. Oh, and as well, the gym, the strength and
Yep.
conditioning. So I think what's really important is you need to look at it from a more holistic perspective. You don't want to just look at it from a skill. So we want to teach skills. We want to teach discipline and respect. We want to build a recovery protocol, because you want to be able to recover so you can come back and get more out of your training, and just the different elements. So I think for me, what has evolved is making that holistic approach towards what we provide for our members.
Absolutely. In your view, in the last couple of years, we've seen an explosion, especially in the UFC, in terms of the Oceania fighters really stand up. Obviously, you've got Hooker fighting this weekend, Adesanya, Volkanovski, Martin Nguyen. What do you attribute that to? Like, what has clicked in the last couple of years that have we always had this talent, or what do you attribute that to?
No, look, I think we've always had the talent. I just think the sport was very new. Like when I first started, it was an unknown, and we pretty much developed everything that's going now. We had to go out there and experiment. We did cross training, we did functional training. We were flipping tires and kettlebells and ropes, and then trying to do traditional gym training and running and trying to work that out. And then we were striking and trying to work out how to strike and grapple. So obviously that has evolved. I think a big part of it is Australia didn't have a very strong wrestling background, but through the MMA, our wrestling is improved. We don't have, our wrestling program is getting better, and I'm a part of the New South Wales Wrestling Association because I think it is important of it. We're part of the New South Wales and Australian Muay Thai Association. We're part of the Australian Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the AJF. So I think it's important to be involved with each of the individual sports and help build them up, help build our wrestling program, because those wrestling skills translate to our MMA fighters, help build the Muay Thai programs because those skills translate to. And I think all that's happened is we've started to understand the different elements. We've gotten better wrestling, which we never had before. Australia's always had high-level Muay Thai.
Yep.
If you go back, we're one of the countries that was known for its Muay Thai. You can look at John Wayne Parr, Nathan Corbin, Stan Longinides, Sam Greco, some of the great names, Gherkin. It's just, we've had great kickboxing strikers. So we had that element covered. Obviously through John Will, who brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Australia, our level of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has evolved. Brazilians have then come over after that, so the level of Jiu-Jitsu has increased. And then through the MMA and more attention being put into our wrestling programs have come up. So now all our grappling and wrestling skills are now starting to come up with our striking skills, and it's starting to all come together. And we've always had smart coaches, and we've always had talented athletes, and we've always had those things, but we didn't have all the information. Now we have all the information. We have the training programs. We have people who are now able to integrate it all together. I said, not just with the skills, but the skills, the conditioning, and the mental aspect of it are all coming together more holistically. The information is out there. More gyms are opening up. Obviously, there's more gyms open up.
Yep.
We're getting more people in. So more people that would normally be very athletic in other sports, such as doing football, soccer, cricket, are now coming into our sport. Yep. So they're getting exposed to it. A lot of the times they're doing the jiu-jitsu, the wrestling, the MMA to complement their football or something like else, but then they're realizing they enjoy this more. And so over that time, as our base has grown, more people coming into the sport, our knowledge that we're gaining from overseas, we're now spreading throughout here. Now we no longer need to go, because before we had to kind of travel to get a lot of that information. Like a lot of the guys would go, I was I think I was the first Australian that went for MMA, went to Tiger Muay Thai.
Yep.
One of the first MMA fighters back in the day that went to Tiger Muay Thai and was teaching there. So we used to have to travel. We used to go to the US. Guys used to go to Greg Jackson's, to ATT, to Las Vegas, where there was a myriad of gyms. So we used to have to travel to get our knowledge. But now that we have that knowledge here, we're bringing it back, and now we're passing it on to the people here. So now our guys don't travel. They may travel a little bit, like I know Volko goes to New Zealand, but I kind of think that's still in our region. But he does it for the extra
Yep.
training partners and the quality of the guys that are down there. We don't need to travel. We can, they do, and they will go do camps overseas, just because if you can afford to, why not? Why not go to some of these other teams as well? But we no longer have to. We have everything we need in one place. As I said, here at Kings, we have every single element of training and recovery that you need to succeed. And that Kings is kind of a representation of Australia. We have everything we need here in Australia to achieve those results.
Absolutely. Well, Elvis, it's been a pleasure, like getting into that mind of yours and really getting to understand like the fundamentals of where we've come from as a nation, and we're really thankful. Mate, before we go, UFC 251, let us go through the picks. Tell us, who do you think is going to win and why? So Usman versus Burns. Who do you have there and how?
Um, Look, I think Usman is going to do it. I mean, Burns is very dangerous. He's got great striking.
Yep.
And obviously his jiu-jitsu is very high level. But again, his jiu-jitsu is better on top. I think, I mean, he's dangerous off his back, but he's much better on top. I don't think he's going to be able to take Usman down. I think Usman will strike with him, realize it's probably not a good idea, and he's going to wrestle him. Usman is smart. He won't. So what a lot of the wrestlers do nowadays is they'll pin you against the cage, wear you out, and wait till near the end of the round. They might take you down a couple of times to let you get up, take you down, let you get up to wear you out, and then take you down and hold you down at the end of the round to win the round.
To punctuate.
So I think there's going to be. I think Usman is going to do a lot of that. I really would like to see Burns win. I think he's an exciting fighter. He comes out to fight, and again, I'm a big fan. He has a very similar style to the way I did, the Muay Thai striking with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and just not afraid to go in there and give it all. I really enjoy it, but I just think Usman is going to out-wrestle. He's going to wrestle him. He's going to pin him up against the cage. He's going to grind him. He's not going to make it an overly exciting fight. I think he may try early and realize it's not a smart move. Obviously, there's always a chance that in a scramble that he may get caught in a sub or in a striking exchange, Burns will hurt him. But I don't think it will happen. It could. I don't underestimate Burns, but if I had to pick someone, it would be Usman by decision.
Gotcha. Volkanovski or Holloway? Who wins in that rerun?
Look, I can't say. I mean, Holloway always comes back better. He'll come back prepared, but I can't see what Holloway can do differently that Volko won't be prepared for. Holloway's style is very, I mean, it's volume based, so you need great cardio. He's not going to out cardio Volko because, again, Volko's game is cardio. He's not going to try and mix it up. He doesn't throw a lot of kicks. He focuses mainly on his reach and his boxing. I think Volko has the skills to get onto the inside, make it a dirty boxing match, grind him against the fence, maybe put in a couple of takedowns. I don't think Volko will look to, a bit like his last fight, probably won't look to take him down, but will use the takedowns to set up his striking. I think Volko is probably too well-rounded, and I just don't think there's enough that Max can change in this short amount of time to change the result for Volko.
Gotcha. And the last one, Jan and Aldo. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is. Look, I think Jan is too young, too explosive, too strong. I think he's been around enough to have enough experience to handle Aldo. Even though I'm a massive Aldo fan, I would love to see Aldo come out and win. I was a fan of him from the WEC days. When he came to the UFC, I was behind him. I predicted the success he'd have. If Aldo comes out like he did in the last couple of fights, yes, he is still very good. He is super skilled. But if he doesn't bring back those low kicks, he's not going to win. The guys have kind of worked out his game. He's got a great takedown defense, but I don't think Petter's going to try and it's not going to try and take. He might go for some takedowns to kind of set up his striking, but I don't think his goal is to take him down. I think he's going to strike with him. And if you can't stop him getting into range and unloading with those bombs, he's going to have problems. If he comes out and starts throwing those kicks the way he used to, the way he did in the WEC days, the way he did in the early days in the UFC, I think he's a legit threat. My only concern is if he's worried about his cardio, he's not going to throw those kicks. So he's going to rely on his boxing. He has very sharp boxing, has good head movement. He angles very well, but I think Jan has the ability to work with that because he has those as well. And I think his hands are heavier enough that he can put Aldo in danger, hopefully not stop him. But yeah, I'm picking him to win over Aldo, though my preference is for the Aldo win.
Awesome. And the last one, Andrade and Rose.
This is a tough one. It's like Andrade is very dangerous. She's very strong, athletic. But you kind of know if you can keep her on the end of a jab, she struggles to get inside because she doesn't have good striking. Rose is very well-rounded. She can keep her on the end of the jab and keep her away. But Rose is also, she has confidence issues. It's probably a bit, she can be up and down with her performances. I'm concerned that Andrade may be in her head from the last match. I think she may be worried about getting slammed or hurt again. She had a very good strategy last time, though I think it was foolish of her to try and hold on to the Kimura when she was getting slammed. I think it was smart to go for it, and if you could use it to break the grip, and she managed to separate her hands.
Yep.
But as soon as she's lifted and the hands are separated, she should have been defending herself rather than trying to focus on the Kimura. If she comes in with that in mind,
yep,
she can win the match. I just think Andrade is going to be in her head, and I look for Andrade to win again.
Understood. Well, Elvis, thanks for your time again. Again, appreciate you being in the show, and chat soon.
Always a pleasure to talk jiu-jitsu and MMA, and hopefully down the track, maybe we can get back on and talk some more, because hell, I've got a lot of stories that I need to get out before the CTE kind of kicks in.
I think I've chatted with a couple of fighters, and not the older guys, but you're relatively articulate, mate, so I think you got away at the right time.
Well, as I said, I'm a big part of what got me into a lot of the recovery stuff is making sure that I didn't suffer the consequences of, because I'll be honest, I had a fairly brutalish career. I put my head on the line. It was a lot of exchanges. I wasn't afraid to exchange. I got in there, I mixed it up, I got knocked down, I bled a lot. So look, I'm not going to say there's no CTE, but I think I've managed to mitigate it through diet, exercise, all the therapies and recovery I brought here. And as I said, and that's something I try and impart to my fighters, because I want to ensure that they have long careers and that they have careers after their fight careers are over. But I appreciate your kind words, and I always like to finish off with, it's good to be the king.
There we go.
Hopefully we'll be back on again.
Awesome. Chat soon, Elvis.
Take care.